Hello, my name is Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association. Thank you for joining me for this IPA talk. Fortunate to have with me Arturo Senteno, who is the now principal at West Leyden High School. However, I've got Arturo with me because Arturo has been named our Assistant Principal of the Year this last year. And so, Arturo, you actually have done what a lot of our assistant principals have done. Not long after they win the award, you've moved from the assistant principal position that you had at Elk Grove Village High School in Elk Grove, and now are the principal at West Leyden in your first year there. So we got a lot of ground that we can cover here during this conversation, and of course want to discuss maybe a little bit about both those positions, your thoughts on what's helped you be a successful school leader and all of that. But just first, welcome and thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. I appreciate it.
Well, it's definitely a pleasure. And Arturo, could you just maybe share a little bit about your story? Anything that you'd be willing to share with us about, kind of what's gotten you to the position that you're in now?
Sure. So a little bit about myself. I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago, and I think that that experience has helped me kind of give me some perspective as I continue on through my educational experiences. Like I said, I started off in a Catholic elementary school. K through 8, and that Catholic elementary school has since shut down, but then transitioned into Chicago Public School, Washington High School, and I think there I learned some new things that I wasn't really accustomed to in a very sheltered K-8 experience, and opened my eyes to just a bunch of things that I'm passionate about now. And so I think that was a good introduction into how important education was. And so from there, I was fortunate enough to go to Monmouth College. I played some football there. And my story starts off with finding ways to pay for school. I didn't come from a very wealthy family, actually, probably not wealthy at all. My parents had 6 kids, so we struggled a little bit. And when it came time to pay the tuition my junior year, my parents were quick to say, "Hey, look, we can't do this anymore. You need to come home." I found college to be very exciting and fun, and I didn't really want to come back. Right. So I joined the Illinois National Guard to pay for my schooling. And that was a pretty cool experience. I did the split option. So one summer I did boot camp. The next summer I did advanced training. I finished up Monmouth College and got a job teaching biology at Rolling Meadows High School about 21 years ago. So that started me right into that field. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately for different reasons, 9/11 happened. And my unit got activated. And so I actually went over to Iraq for a year and a half, served with the 1st Infantry Division. I came back to teaching biology. I still loved it, had the passion for it. But there was a leadership calling that I eventually took on as Dean of Students at Rolling Meadows a couple of years afterwards. I did that for about 6 years, transitioned into the Assistant Principal for Student Services at Rolling Meadows, and then moved over to Elk Grove High School. Right when my kids were starting to come into the pipeline of Rolling Meadows, and I didn't really feel like my kids and I being in the same building was probably a good experience for them.
Sure. I've lived that, so I know.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Elk Grove High School is in District 214, same district, so it was a little bit easier to transition over to another district building. But there, I got a different lens. I was the API, so Assistant Principal for Instruction. And I think I got a whole nother set of view on the school, which I thought to be pretty exciting and good to see how the instruction works back in the classroom, just like when I was a teacher. And then I was fortunate enough to move here at West Leyden after 3 years at Elk Grove. I worked with Paul Kelly and a bunch of great other administrators that helped me kind of form where I'm at now.
Yeah, Paul being one of our former high school principals of the year, was also a national finalist for principal of the year. So you've obviously had quite a depth and breadth of experiences, Arturo. That's pretty incredible, thinking about that and just life circumstances influencing you to do some of the things that you've done and shape you into who you are. So, you talked about some of your early childhood experiences and education. You kind of brushed on those. So if you wouldn't mind, I'm just curious, what do you think really influenced or impacted you from then to what you're doing now with kids?
Yeah, some of the things I noticed, and again, it might have been more of a transition from a Catholic school to a public school, but I noticed that in a lot of our schools, the public schools, there was a lot of different levels of academic achievements that were in my mind kind of separated out more dramatically than a Catholic school. And so, in my experiences in a Catholic school, there was not many students, so we were all kind of one classroom idea. And we, break up in different ways based on academic ability. So we're all in the same classroom. You fast forward into high school where we're put in such a large area. I quickly noticed the different levels of achievement. So you had honors level kids that would be the general level kids that were in different classes. And I use those terms because I saw some separation of schools, right? There's a different section of the building for certain classes. And I felt like that was interesting. I took note of it, fast forward now as an administrator. I think that's one of the things I'm really curious about when we start talking about equity is, are we giving kids a full high school experience, or do they sometimes come in at a certain level and we just maintain that level the entire time? So that's something that kind of triggered off early when I was in my high school experience, and certainly had friends at all different levels. And just talking with them, their experience being a little different than mine. We're in the same high school. I don't know how I felt about that at the time.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, and I'd be remiss if I didn't circle back here to your military experience. Sure grateful for your service there. What have you brought forward from that time into your leadership positions now?
Yeah. So in the military, I originally joined as a 91 Bravo, which is a combat medic. I was a pre-med major in college. I thought I was going to go the medical field. And what's cool about the military, I guess, is that you could try out jobs. And if you don't like them, at least beyond military, you don't have to go into it. So I think my experience as a medic wasn't as the same way I thought it was. Maybe watching too many episodes of ER. I thought every day was like that. Clearly it was right. Not.
George Clooney, baby.
That's right. I was not George Clooney, and mostly when the military I was looking at athletes' feet. So it was not fun.
Right. Yeah, right. Out in the desert, I get that. I'm sure.
Yeah. So
wear dry socks, fellas.
Yeah, that's right. So I actually transitioned and became an officer. I joined OCS. I did that for 18 months in Fort Benning, Georgia. And I got an opportunity for leadership. I mean, that's the pinnacle, right, of leadership, is starting off as a lieutenant. I was a platoon leader, and it just happened that when I got deployed, actually deployed with an air defense artillery unit out of Marseille, Illinois, and we actually went up there and supported some infantry units. So I actually was a platoon leader, so I had direct leadership, which was kind of a cool experience. I was in charge of 25 guys, very similar from being in charge of 25 kids in a high school setting that I just left. And I'll tell you what's interesting is leadership is good leadership no matter what, right? And so taking care of troops, taking care of soldiers is very similar to taking care of students, right? When you have their best interest in mind and they trust you, and that emulates whether it's on a battlefield or in a classroom. I think that's what I kind of learned, is that when you take care of people, when you build relationships, there's not many limits things that people will go through to help you out and support.
Well, what's interesting too with those troops weren't a whole lot older probably than the high school students you're working with now, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, a lot of experience there. Well, Arturo, we're talking. You're the assistant principal of the year this year. It's interesting about APs, and I never was one, but I worked with some outstanding ones during my time as a high school principal, and was so grateful for their work and leadership. And what's interesting about APs, there's probably no AP that serves in schools that has the same job description, right? Because they're just so different. And, when you come into that role, you have to be ready for so much. Would you mind just talking a little bit about the work that you were responsible for when you were at Elk Grove, and how you felt like, you worked to lead effectively in that unique position, right? Where you're not necessarily the head, but you still, the leadership that you are required to exhibit is extremely important to moving, things forward to do what's best for kids.
Yeah. So in Elk Grove, I was the associate principal for instruction. And so kind of what was under my purview is all of the division heads or department chairs in some different buildings, and all the academic evaluations that go along with it, some of the PLC leadership that's also involved there. And what I found is that leadership can happen at any level. And I say that because leadership could happen even when you put a kid in a class row leader. a line leader. Like those are all leadership opportunities. What you do with it really requires some of your background in developing leadership yourself. So, being the API, I understand now that's not the principal role. I understood back then as well. And then trying to find out what the vision and mission was from my principal, Paul Kelly. He did a good job of telling me, hey, look, like this is what we need in our building, and giving me some like marching orders, so to speak, where I could then kind of formulate, be creative, get some input and buy-in, and develop plans that's successful throughout. And one of the things I think was pretty beneficial was that we had a structure in place already at Elk Grove where we had PLC leaders meet regularly. And so monthly meetings with them allowed me the opportunity to not only revamp some of the ways that we looked at instruction, but also kind of entertain and actually move some things like detracking, which we did 2 years ago. We piloted actually the second semester of the pandemic. Not the most perfect time, but I think we had our teachers bought in, and they were part of willing, and they're actually the ones that were making it happen. And so how do we support them at that level, I think was super important. Another piece that I thought was under my purview, but I guess in any roles under my purview, is giving student voice to students, empowering them to make decisions. We created a principal advisory group, and that Paul and I headed up, that really try to get the buy-in of students by asking every student in a classroom during a certain period of the day to be a representative. And so we'd have quarterly meetings. You bring a bunch of kids together, it's like a lunchroom. Right? You don't know what behaviors to expect, but when you get a bunch of kids together and you give them guidance and training and the skills to talk the right talk and empower them, you'd be amazed on some of the things they have to say. And so we kind of used a model of being like a representative of their class, where they were getting feedback from kids. When we wanted to do a bell schedule change or a homecoming schedule, we ran it past the principal advisory group. We tasked them to get input from your class and then come back and let us know what we need to revise. What that started to do is give ownership to the students, right? Behavior started to fall off dramatically. They were becoming part of the decision-making process, and it wasn't the adults telling the kids what to do. It was the kids feeling like, hey, this is my school. This is kind of cool. Maybe we could have some change if we need it.
That's terrific. Sure appreciate that mindset. So let me ask you this, Arturo, and obviously, as I kind of couch this question, there's definitely an element where it also depends on the principal that you're working with. But how do you see as an AP is, giving any thoughts on how to lead up effectively to your principal? What are some guidance that maybe you could give to that as assistant principals are trying to work through how they can, effectively help influence and help, the building principal in that building? It might also guide some principals who would listen to this, how to work more effectively with their APs and make sure that, really there's good collegiality and working together and helping share responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, first and foremost is having really great communication. I was fortunate enough to have an office right next to Paul Kelly, where when I need some guidance, even if it's the littlest thing, like, hey, can you proofread this really quick before I send it out? I could just go next door and reach out to him. I think those lines of communication for any AP to principal relationship has to be open. You have to spend time to develop a relationship where you're understanding the person and where they come from. And then I think on both ends, by developing a strong relationship, you understand what strengths they're bringing to the table. And I think Paul was really good at saying, hey, look, you can do this pretty well, Art. I want you to focus on this. And I think that made me feel good, right? He recognized something that I was good at. He kind of gave me a task that was in my wheelhouse, and I was able to take off with it. So I think that happens when you have good communication. And there's really no substitute for that. Again, if you're in close proximity, even better. But if you're not, then you have to be intentional about making sure you're connecting. And it has to be, in my opinion, genuine. It doesn't always have to be a calendar event. It could be like, hey, how are things going? Checking in every morning. I think those things pay dividends, because that's when I learned most about people. When you catch in and you bring them a coffee and you say, hey, man, did you check out the game last night? Like, those conversations start to build a relationship and a foundation where you have good communication.
Yeah. So I'm assuming you're a South Side or you're a Sox fan then, right?
That's a good assumption.
Chicago's had a tough year. As Cardinal fans, we've had a little better run of it, but I think the magic number here on September 23rd is 5 games. But who's counting? Albert only needed 2 more to go before he hit 700. But anyway, I digress here. So let me ask you. Now you're in that principal's role at West Leiden. Obviously, a nice school district there for sure. Great opportunity. How do you feel? I guess I'm curious about. What from the assistant principal's role helped you really be prepared to take on that principal position?
Yeah, I think an advantage that I came in with in this particular role is that I've kind of done a lot of the jobs leading up to this, right? And so I think just the content knowledge of knowing those roles helps a little bit because I could speak to that language. So when we talk about building a master schedule, I've done that before. That helps, right? But I also think it goes back to what I talked about is forming relationships with people. I came into West Leiden and I didn't really know anybody. I don't know anybody who worked here prior. I don't have really ties to anybody who in the administration themselves. So it really is a fresh start, which is kind of refreshing to know people.
Yeah, there are pros and cons to that, right? You don't know anybody, but you also, you don't have any baggage that you're carrying.
That's right.
Either, right? Or any preconceived notions of things that people have about you.
Yeah, I think what I'm learning is that this building relationship and trust takes time. Yeah. And so you got to dedicate time, right? And I think your actions and your communication all say a lot about the view of what people see of you. So I'm really careful and cautious on what I say, how I react, because those things are viewed under a microscope right now, because people are trying to figure out, do I want to build a relationship with this guy or not? And so those things are super important. I mean, it goes back to a lot of my doctoral work, which is understanding relationships, right? And how does the supervisor actually empower people and give them intrinsic motivation to come to work? That's super important.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So as you've transitioned now into this principal role, what's been different or maybe in terms of mindset or whatever the overall experience for you that I think this could be instructive in particular for people that are sitting in that AP role now that are looking at looking to get a hold of one of those principal positions.
Yeah, I think the difference, and this goes without saying, is you're responsible for everything in the building, right? Yeah. Whereas I think an AP role, you have a perspective or a lens, or in the district I came from, we were given titles that kind of defined what your role was. I think as a principal, there's no principal of instruction. You're the principal of the building. And you own everything. And so I think knowing who's there to help you and trying to figure out how you can support them to be successful is a big piece of it. So knowing all the key players in the building and really also making connections with everybody, I think is super important. So, I think the lens gets really, really large as a principal, right? And there's no substitute, like I said, for relationships, which I think is the key to success.
Yeah, I think for me, as I entered into the position of principal, and this was coming out of the classroom, it was the emotional shift, right? And the emotional weight of the job as the building leader versus, for myself, a classroom teacher, whole different ballgame. And I had a real carnal knowledge of my own principal when I was a kid, which was my dad. And even having that experience of observing him growing up, he obviously didn't share everything with me that he was dealing with, nor could he. But I still had no full preparation until you're actually in that seat. So that's right. A lot different.
And listening, I meet with staff regularly, right? And one-on-ones, getting to know the new principal. And I always ask them, give me some advice. I'm your principal now, give me some advice to be successful. I want to be here for a long time. And the majority of them say, we just need someone to listen to us.
Yeah, boy. Well, what is it? The saying goes, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you should listen twice as much as you talk, I think is what comes to mind for me.
Right.
Well, Arturo, our theme this year as an association is leaders of hope, and me knowing you as I do, you've served on the IPA board for a while now. I know this is something that's important to you as well. I'm just curious about your perspective on being a leader of hope and what you would encourage people to be doing to make sure that they're a leader of hope.
Yeah. So I really do like this year's theme. The idea of being a leader of hope is something that speaks to me personally. And why it does is because for me, I realize that everybody brings a strength to the table. And so and the minute we can highlight everybody's strength, I think is really when you have something good going, and it inspires hope for me. So when I think about students coming off the pandemic, when I think about teachers coming back from a virtual, hybrid, whatever situation that we threw at them every week, coming back, if we capitalize off the strengths that we've learned through that process, I think there's a chance that we can all be better than what we were prior. And for me, that's filled with hope. I tell our staff, I said, the minute that we focus on student strength, we realize that we have something great. The minute we focus on our deficiencies, it feels burdensome. And so, that idea of hope is that we need to focus on our strengths, get better at what we can do, because true learning happens when we feel inspired and in a positive environment. I'm not sure which NFL coach, I thought it was Tony Dungy, that talked about, players learn best watching highlight films, not missed tackle films. And so for me, that resonates, because what do we highlight as leaders? And giving staff hope is we should highlight what we're really good at. And I think sometimes schools aren't always best suited for that. There's a lot of kids in my building now that have this amazing skill of bilingualism. And sometimes it doesn't get celebrated as much as it can. And I think, how do we put that as a standardized state test? If that's important, how do we highlight that as a way to make a newspaper cover? I don't know. But if we talk about how important that is and we make that strength even stronger, amazing things can happen.
Yeah, that's a terrific example of that. And I love the whole concept of looking at the highlight reel, right? It's that strengths-based approach. Love that. Well, Arturo Senteno, grateful for you spending a little time with me here during this IPA talk. Sure appreciate it. Best of luck to you in year one there at West Leiden, but and also getting to celebrate being assistant principal of the year here for IPA this last year during your time there at Elk Grove. So thanks for being with me.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Again, my name is Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association. If there's anything IPA can do for you, don't hesitate to give us a call at any time, or you can check us out on the web at www.ilprincipals.org. Take care.